Hello, everyone. I am absolutely thrilled to be with you today at ChangeNOW. We are all very busy. There's lots of noise, so I will ask you to start to do a clean slate. We're going to close our eyes all together, and we're going to take 3 deep breaths all together. I know it's busy outside, there's a lot of noise, we've been meeting so many people, so we need to center first, and we're going to talk about inner change, so that's actually really important to center ourselves first. Whenever you're ready, we're going to breathe 3 times with consciousness. Okay. Whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes or you can keep them closed if you prefer. And I don't know for you, but I already feel much better and much more calm. Okay, so I am really happy to be with you today. I'm really excited about this coming session because our amazing guests are going to show us how connecting to our deep consciousness, we did a little bit right now, and using the power of our imagination are absolutely vital in driving systemic change. To make it really short, we won't change the world if we don't change ourselves and raise our level of consciousness. That's basically what we're going to tackle. And I think we are quite a lot of ourselves agree to that right now. The first speaker is Erik Fernholm. He's the initiator and co-founder of Inner Development Goals. He will tell us all about it in 1 second. He's also the co-founder of 29K platform. He's coming from neuroscience and chose to be a bridge builder for the last 15 years, creating social initiatives to build a more sustainable world. The main question he's going to tackle with his work is, if human being is the problem, how can it be the solution? Ladies and gentlemen, please make a round of applause for Erik Fernholm.
Thank you. Hello. Can you guys hear me? Okay, perfect. Thank you. So, I kind of want to keep the consciousness that Laura framed for us here, and I want to throw you into an experiment. Is that okay? Some nods, some people are like, I don't know what that means, I don't trust you. Okay? So this experiment may raise some emotions, some reactions, that's the point. So just try to see if you can hold it. Ready? Ready? Yeah. Ah, okay, yeah. Are we back? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so let's dive in. I'll shoot some questions for you guys to just sense into. First one, out of the global biomass for mammals on the planet, how much is humans and our cattle? 22%, 73%, 11%, or 98%? What do you think? So the answer is 98%. There are more tigers in captivity in the United States than there are tigers in the wild on the planet. Just let that sink in. So this is more or less our game. We are the ones at the wheel, right? Next one. What kills more people globally? Terrorism, murder, war, or suicide? Exactly. Suicide actually kills more than terrorism, murder, war combined each year. Crazy. Third one, how many people are engaged at work globally? Not who think that everything is fun, but who care about what they're doing. 15%, 73, 68, or 32. Now you're getting to know me, right? So you're like, take the worst. 15%, correct. 15% have intrinsic motivation, they care what they do. Lastly, how much has the insect population decreased during the last 20 years according to numerous studies? This is mainly across Europe. 15%, 73, 68, or 80%? The answer is 80%. So when I was young, you took a drive in the summertime in Sweden, you had to stop and clear the windshield. When was the last time you had to do that? Even though it's spring, turning into summer. I can't even remember when I had to do that the last time. And that's a scary fact. So I asked you guys to kind of hold space for this. So what's happening in you when you hear these data points? Is it deflection? Like this doesn't really matter that much? Is it questioning the data behind? Is it overwhelm of saying like this is too big for us to cope with? Or opposing reaction could be, but we are the change. Let's be the change. Maybe too early identifying with the change. So no matter how we are reacting here, the intrinsic, the internal aspect of these challenges that we're facing is kind of put to the forefront here, right? And throughout the external system we're looking at, you could look at the SDGs and say them as, instead of the global goals, you say they're the global symptoms, but just reformulated into positive aims, right? But this is the effect that our human activity is having on the planet at scale. Mass extinction at a rate that's, thousands of times faster than the baseline, systemic symptoms, and the root cause the root cause has basically two things in common. One, all these existential threats that we're facing are global, and secondly, they're caused by human behavior. They're caused by us. Just hold that a second. Because nobody wakes up in the morning aiming to have the problems that we are creating. I'm just guessing that nobody wakes up in the morning like, hope we have more species extinction. So on one level, we could say that the old paradigm in our society for the last maybe 400 years of linearity, separation, individualism is kind of coming to its end because it's obviously not sustainable. And I mean, listen to the story we have of happiness. Like, what is driving the systemic symptoms? The story we have of happiness is basically get on top of this pyramid and make an exit. Make an exit from the system that you don't want to be part of anymore. Like, sell your company, make an exit, become financially independent so you're free and wealthy enough to do whatever you want with no relationship to any other system. In psychology, we talk about an individual who has those types of traits as a psychopathic narcissist. But in markets, we say that that's the goal, right? The problem with this model is it's basically this. Which is the fastest way to win the most when you're running up a hierarchy? It's quite easy. Care less and sacrifice more. The more you can externalize onto other things than your metric, the faster you can move. And this is not because we have bad actors. This is because the game is kind of rigged in that way. So this is where we're coming from. This is very much the lens through which we see the world. And this is also why the way that we are solving problems today in the world is very much the problem. The way that we're solving problem is the problem. So this industrial way of looking at the world, where we own it, we own nature, and we can extract whatever value we want out of it, I mean, it is very effective, and that's the trap as well. It's great at simple or complicated problems that kind of require technical solutions, like building an airplane, technical challenge. Heart surgery, technical challenge. But what we're facing now is not a complicated environment, it's very much a complex environment, where there is no blueprint, basically. And the approach can't be an approach where we just think that we need a blueprint and can solve it, but we need an adaptive approach that really changes the learner in itself. So we're facing adaptive challenges at a global scale. And this, of course, means that we need to change to be able to face it. And that there may be a trap also with identifying with being the solution too early before we're learning enough where we are the solution and where in my life, for sure, I am actually still the problem more than I am the solution. So just sense in what's happening in you, if you're maybe both the solution and the problem. So, if we know that the internal world of individuals and groups are fundamental for this massive transition that society has to go through, we also know that the internal worlds have to transform themselves as well. And I know Jakob Trollbäck, who actually designed the SDGs for the United Nations, and was part of that process. So I talked to him and said, I mean, aren't we facing a similar problem for the internal dimensions of the world that we are part of that needs to change as well, to bring forth these kind of external transformations of all these interlapping systems? And Jakob, he, of course, being a designer, he's like, yes, we need to be much more clear and succinct, to give people a map to talk about, much like the SDGs has given us a way to talk about what the external problems may be and how they interlink, instead of saying my problem is the most important problem and competing with everybody else in the sustainability world, right? So having a map and having a language for it is what we started exploring through one question. And this took some of the brightest minds on the planet a couple of months to actually arrive at. And this is the question. What capabilities, qualities, or skills do you believe are essential to develop individually and collectively in order to get us significantly closer to fulfilling the Sustainable Development Goals? Just think about what your answer would be. Now, we asked 4,000 experts around the world this, mainly biased to Europe, though, because we're a Scandinavian initiative from the beginning. It's now expanding to 2 million people throughout the entire globe, especially focusing on native cultures and the global south. And then we brought all that data back, and we asked our scientific advisors and networks of scientists, like among these, some of them, one of them is in the audience, but some of them you may know as well otherwise. And try to boil it down and say, what is the kind of essence of this with statistical analysis, but also looking at the research. And what we came out with was actually these, the Inner Development Goals, to mirror the SDGs and saying what internal transformation has to take place, or can be a pivotal leverage point, so that we can work on ourselves in our environments to create the capacity to care and act on wicked problems, because we're not trained in that, we're not schooled in that. So how can we build these capacities? And from my point of view, maybe this is more important than us trying to convince people who don't really act for the SDGs. I mean, you know, the time is short and we haven't arrived at a lot of results in the last couple of years. So what is blocking us? I mean, mainly it's people understanding the complexities and still caring instead of shutting off when it becomes really heavy, right? So the founding partners are the New Division. That's Jakob Trollbeck, who designed the SDGs. It's 29K, a non-profit platform to scale inner development for free to everybody. It's a platform that's available. You can download it today. And the Oak Island Foundation, which has been working with the research around this for a long time. So we started this from this idea that maybe something here could be needed, maybe something could be useful for someone, basically. And what we found was almost like a tsunami of response that was global. People started reaching out to us from global companies, small initiatives, social entrepreneurship. We even had the president of Costa Rica call us and said, I want to implement this in the entire Costa Rican government, because we feel that we want to pioneer the SDGs, but we also feel that we aren't getting the traction that we need, and to have a conversation at least around the inner dimensions that are kind of blocking us or that can catalyze us would help us a lot. So I've talked about the kind of path to this and the context in which we sit, at least. So what is the result? Where do we end with these questionnaires and the science behind it? And it's basically 5 categories and 23 skills that all of them are evidence-based, and there's evidence-based tools that can measurably impact all of these, and they're also connected to how people can approach and care about really wicked, complex problems. So just to give you guys a short overview. So being, relationship to self. Like, where do you believe that you begin, and where do you believe that you end? Is it your ownership? Is it your body? Is it your family? If you look at a bee and a flower, is that a bee, a bumblebee, and a flower separate, or are they actually one system because they can't exist without the other? So defining the bumblebee or the flower without the opposite system would be nonsensical, right? So where do you end? And if you start shifting the perspective to these skills, you see that we've been told a story that we are separate from everything else, but actually what we're rediscovering is that things are very much more entangled than we thought that they were. Like behavior, for example. If I gain 10 kilos and you're a good friend of mine, the chance of you gaining 10 kilos is 157% higher because of me. Spreading my memes, spreading my behavior towards you, okay? And it goes the opposite way as well. Like if you start exercising, or if you vote, or if we're this mesh of behaviors, you're not a separate individual. You have never been. Thinking, of course, this is more of cognitive capacities to address and see complexities, see systems, and care for them. Relating, kind of obvious maybe. Collaboration skills, like how do we also act together? How do we seek more perspectives than only our own? And acting. So these are the categories that kind of emerged from the data of what we saw. So I want to end with not going into any one of these, because you could do that later on, and there's a lot of research, of course, and we only have a short time, but I want to invite you to sense a little bit into this instead. So please close your eyes. For those of you who are sleeping, that's easy. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Please close your eyes. Take a deep breath. Okay, now just imagine that you're not at the ChangeNOW conference. You're not here, but you're 30 years into the future. And I have really great news. The news is, we made it. Like, you are proud of what we humans have created. When you think about the old stories of existential risk and the SDGs, it's almost like a cute memory, because we navigated through all that complexity. And you look down at your hands, and you see that they're a lot older and more wrinkly than today. And in one of your hands is the hand of maybe your grandchild. So So if we arrived, how are you different? What changes did you have to go through? What stories of who you are, where you end, where you begin, had to change? What time horizons had to change? For you to say that I know in my bones that we are living not only a sustainable life, but a life that is generating a planet that we are proud to hand off to the next generation. Okay, so welcome back to the present. So this is the ChangeNOW conference, right? And with 2 exclamation marks. And I love the urgency of it, like I honestly do. And I'm so proud to be here. But it does also raise the question, when you read that, who was it aimed towards? Who was going to change now? Was it the business? Was it other people because we are already the solution? Or was it you and I? Because if we are already the solution, we're not that curious, we're not that open, we're not seeking more perspectives for where we can learn, where we can change, right? So if I could ask for anything, basically, it would be, how can we build the collective capacity and language to make sure that what we're changing now is the capacity maybe to hold uncertainty before we shut down, or grab a solution that we say, this is an impact investment, even though deep down, if we dig into it, maybe it's not shifting the system in the direction we really know holistically that it needs to go, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Erik. Thanks a lot. I am now going to welcome on stage Steve Leventhal. He's the CEO of CorStone. Please make a round of applause for Steve. Hi, Steve. How are you?
Jane.
You're doing good?
Yes, I'm doing great. Hi, everybody. Great to be here.
So you're the CEO of CorStone.
Yes.
My first question is therefore super simple. What is CorStone, and when was it created?
CorStone is an international NGO that I founded about 15 years ago in 2008 with the purpose to focus on inner well-being, inner health and well-being, particularly around girls, adolescent girls, and youth in low-income countries.
Can you give us some maybe data, as you said you were in different countries. Which countries? What do you do?
Sure. So maybe I'll start with the sort of the purpose behind the founding a little bit. About 25 years ago, I was looking out at the landscape of a lot of really tremendous work that was being done with youth in low-income countries around the world by a lot of really wonderful international nonprofits and so on. But I noticed this big glaring gap, and Erik just talked about it a little bit. Really 2 gaps. One of those gaps being that there's an emphasis on working on the tangible, on the practical, on the visible. School infrastructure, teacher training, building a clinic, building a hospital, building a road. These are very, very important and critical aspects, of course, of creating a functioning, well-functioning society. But I found very little work being done on what I would call the internal pieces. Self-identity, self-concept, attitudes, values, and so on. And the truth is, the uncomfortable truth is we still have about 1 billion youth living in poverty in low-income countries around the world. That's about 12% of the world's population. And for me, and I think most people would agree, that's a huge untapped potential. So when I founded CorStone, it was really to look at the inner piece of that in a very evidence-based way. We started with just 100 girls in an 800-year-old Sufi enclave in Old Delhi in India. As of 2025, we'll be 5 million kids that are going through programs that we've developed across India, Kenya, and Rwanda.
Is there more countries you're trying to address to
Yeah, we have demand now from several other countries, and unfortunately, it's just a matter of putting the funds together, to launch those. But we're looking at Uganda, Cambodia, Vietnam, Senegal, and the United States.
So from what I understand, you're trying to have a systemic approach, not just a local approach. How do you do that? Very concretely, what kind of programs, and do you do positive lobbying, working with governments and everything?
Yeah, great question. So we do both community-based programs as well as school-based programs, but our focus has really been on large-scale change, systems change. So how do you impact in a positive way, as I was saying, the self-identity, attitudes, values, and so on, of a child, but millions of children, in some way where they become empowered to push back against, for example, in many areas where we work, early marriage, massive gender inequities, and so on. So while we have worked in both community-based programs as well as schools, we have found if we really want to have a systemic change, you need to have a partner on the other side who can take over your program and continue it when you as an NGO depart and when the funding departs. So in India, we've worked across around 6 states, but our largest program is when one of the poorest and largest states in India, it's a state called Bihar, B-I-H-A-R, Bihar in northeast of India near the Nepalese border. There's about 120 million people in that one state. So very, 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 very large. So for the last 10 years, we've been working very closely with the government. We have several, actually, multi-year agreements in place with the government, where we're expanding now. We started there in maybe a few hundred schools. We're now expanding to 35,000 schools across the state. The program is being put into the state curriculum. So that's about 3.5 million children who are 99% of whom live in poverty, who will be going through the program. In Kenya, we have an agreement with the National Ministry of Education, which is putting a program in every school nationwide across the country. And the program is basically a 1-hour-a-week program that we have an approach that we call working from the inside out, really starting with helping a child to reimagine really what's possible, reimagine their self-identity. There's a huge missing piece in development work. When you're a girl and you're poor and you're from a low caste or discriminated against tribal region, if you're not dealing with that potential and that potential shift of reimagining self-identity and what the trajectory of your life can be, then you're missing the boat. And we've done many randomized, a couple of randomized control trials, year after year evaluation, and we know this is the missing piece.
So there's the evaluation, but how did you build this program firsthand? What questions did you ask yourself? Did you go see psychologists? How did you build it?
So my own background is an intersection of Eastern thought and psychology, and a master's with a focus on organizational psychology. But when I started with, as I mentioned, I started with just 100 girls in this enclave in Old Delhi. When I started, I didn't know if this had legs or not, And so I brought together a very small team of therapists and counselors and people with social work and so on, and we built what I would call a skeleton kind of program. And I trained just 4 teachers in this school how to do the program. And within 3 months, they came back with the most well-attended day of school is when they can come for the group, for the program. Relationships between teachers and students changed, and students changed, and relationships between the teachers changed, school engagement went up, and so on. So we started very small. From there, I moved to about 1,000 girls across several slum areas of India. For that, I brought in a formal someone to do a formal evaluation. And again, the results were off the charts. So at that point, I went to a funder who gave me the best advice that I'd ever probably received working in this sector. I basically went in, I'm not going to mention the funder, but it's a large international funder who works on reproductive sexual health and adolescent health, maternal health around the world. And I went in basically with 2 requests. I said, I want to do a program for 50,000 girls, and I want you to fund it. And I said, I want to do a large-scale randomized control trial because I believe that what we're going to find is that when we focus on inner well-being and inner health and inner development, we're going to see impacts not just on mental health, which we will measure, but also adolescent health, self-advocacy for your education rights, health rights, school engagement, so on and so forth, reproductive sexual health. So we predicted that we would see impacts across these multiple domains. So that program officer from the foundation said the best thing ever. He said, we'll fund your randomized control trial because I see what you're trying to do and I really believe it's going to work. No problem. And to do this kind of research is very expensive. And then he said to me, I really don't care about your 50,000 girls. We have 400 million. So I want you to go home and I want you to think about that level of scale. And that was transformational for me for a small nonprofit, but also in terms of the vision of what was possible.
How do you scale up so much and still keep the DNA of the project?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The DNA is a really important piece. So we are very research-based, and after we conducted the research trial, the results were excellent. And so dissemination and publishing and all of that was a hugely important piece. The second piece was then to engage with the government who had learned about, who knew we were doing the trial, and to find sort of, friendly faces on the other side. Now, as probably everybody can imagine, when you work with government, you have a lot of instability, especially governments in the areas where we work. You have a lot of turnover. You certainly have corruption, which fortunately we have not had to deal with. So it's important to really pick your allies at sort of the high level, but also to work as grassroots as possible. And I think this is going to become, should have already become, but will become a very important piece of climate change work. There's a lot of interest right now in this intersection of inner well-being, girls' education in particular, and climate change. Because girls in so many ways hold the future of the world.
Can you explain in which ways? Because we always, lots of NGOs address girls first, but it's not always clear for people in their mind why it's so important to address girls first. Can you explain us quickly why?
Well, one piece, of course, is if you're leaving out roughly 50% of the world and you're trying to make, global transformation, you're not going to reach global transformation.
Yeah.
Second piece, of course, is in many of the households in which we work, I'm not saying this is universal, but in the areas where we work, the women, the girls who then become women, have a lot of control over decisions that are going to be made around household purchases and so on. Equally important, they are the decision makers around, are they going to marry off their girl, their daughter, at 12 to 13 years old into sort of another generation of poverty? Or are they then themselves going to become change makers and push their children to complete their education and so on? So it becomes very important to look at what is that education going to be. I personally feel that most education, public school education, mass education, government-funded education, not so much private schools, but government education focuses very much on what do you want to be in your life, not who do you want to be. This is a huge missing piece. And our work is really about who do you want to be in a world that, like it or not, is going through massive, massive transformation. If we don't raise that level of consciousness about that, both at a spiritual level, psychological level, emotional level, so on, then I think all this other wonderful work that you see here is great, but it will not succeed.
So from what I understood, there's it's 1 hour a week. How do you transform those girls and boys, because there are also boys in some programs, in just 1 hour a week? So when you start, how are they, and what shifts, what inner transformation do they go through during the program, and what do they go out with?
So there's a long answer to that, so I'll try to encapsulate it.
We have time.
So I think I mentioned we work with what we call an inside-out approach. So starting with self-identity, self-concept, right? What do I think is possible? What are my strengths? And then from there, and we work a lot, some of you may be familiar with the field of positive psychology, which has a very well-researched body of work called character strengths. So we help children to identify those strengths. And all of you have them, even if you don't know they're called character strengths, otherwise you wouldn't be in this room.
So you address self-esteem,
yes,
I
so,
guess.
well, so strengths are like, I'm curious, I'm funny, I'm very loving, I'm compassionate, I have a good sense of humor, you know, whatever. So they identify that, and then they start to learn about how to use those strengths in different ways. Then we go into emotional competence, emotional intelligence. We move into like interaction, assertive communication, nonviolent communication. And then we get very practical with it about what is a goal, and how do I set a goal, and what are strategies to reach those goals. And then we tie that with issues around gender and other issues that are upfront for children, like, for example, early marriage or sexual harassment on the way to school, or I'm not able to go to school when I have my period when I'm a girl because that would be embarrassing or humiliating or something like that. So that's sort of the very fundamentals of the program. And our research has shown really interesting things. You know, you can even measure like emotional vocabulary. And in the beginning, the children's, particularly girls, but boys also, the emotional vocabulary is very, very small, very narrow. And by the end of the program, it's really expanded. You'll also see that manifest like the children's attitudes in schools, like they're much more engaged in schools. Teachers report that now the girls used to be very shy. Now they're more outgoing. A government official will go to the school and then report back to us and say, wow, before we used to go and we'd say, anybody have any questions? And the girls would sit there like this. And now they're in their face, you know, pounding away. Why don't we have this? Why don't we have that? Blah, 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 blah. So they become very empowered around their rights and their ability to communicate what they want.
You also work with boys, and I'm sure they are shifted as well. Do you see transformation? How do they transform?
Yeah,
What
so
changed?
the boys piece is interesting. Maybe it's common sense, but I kind of missed it up front. Initially, we worked with girls only. And then you get to a point where you realize we can teach the girls how to push back. We can teach the girls how to advocate for their rights, to be strong and empowered, and so many other things. And at the end of the day, if we don't teach boys not to rape and to abuse, which is a massive, massive problem in the communities where we work, then at the end of the day, you're still going to have somewhat limited results. So it has been as wonderful as it has been to visit some of the all-girls schools that we go to and to see who they have become. It's really equally wonderful to meet the boys. And we have recorded them, you know, saying initially I thought, oh, these silly girls, why are they going to school? You know, all they're going to do is make chapatis at home and, you know, so on. Like, just no sense around their sort of individual right to live a, you know, fulfilling life. And then we see this huge transformation in terms of the boys, in terms of how they look at that. And even boys who say, you know, and they don't mean this in the way, oh, a girl needs a protector. It's not that. But they say, now I see that part of my job is to ensure that the girls in my community also have an opportunity, you know, to live.
So it brings them together, I guess.
Yes, yeah, very much. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We talked already about scaling up. What advice would you maybe give the audience about how do you bring institutional change? How do you bring systemic change? Is there an approach that you would recommend? Some steps?
So I do think okay, first of all this gray hair, you know, I earned this, right? So it doesn't come easy. And I don't want to pretend in any way it's just, you know, a nice straightforward path to success. But we certainly have learned and documented over the years, you know, there's people who do a top-down approach and people who do a bottom-up approach and multiple different leadership styles. And honestly, from my perspective, you need all of the above. You need to have developed those champions, as I was saying earlier, at the top level, because they're going to advocate for you and push you through, you know, some of the political challenges that you're going to face. But those faces change. And so we work very closely at the community level. It's what's called the block level in India, or the district level or county level in Kenya, you know, at multiple levels, having a very as high-touch approach as possible. And also recognizing, I mean, I come out of marketing business development originally many years ago in the private sector, just recognizing that particularly in these areas where we work, your brand is everything. And our staff has been so well trained that even the slightest word that comes out of your mouth, or you show up at a school out in the jungle, or you show up 10 minutes late versus you show up on time. Like all these things, all these little things really add up. And as it takes years, to build the brand equity. And of course, to bring your funders along for the ride. We have taken an approach that we don't have lots of funders, but we have a very strong core group of corporate and private funders who've been with us for years. And I think that no matter what industry you're in or sector you're in, that's really important. Yeah.
If you could start all over again and go back 15 years before when you started CorStone, what would you do differently?
Not a lot.
Or what did you wish you knew that would have made you gain time?
I think, like I said, this program officer who put me in touch with the scale, 400 million in India alone, maybe right out off the bat if I'd noticed that, but that was only maybe a couple of years in. I think it usually comes down to funding. I've worked in startups in Silicon Valley prior to this before moving into the NGO world 25 years ago. Funding is always a challenge no matter what you're in, yeah? And as my uncle, who was a very successful businessman, says, if you don't need any money, the banks will loan you money. And when you need money, the banks won't loan you money, right? Investors are kind of that way, and philanthropists are kind of that way. So one of the things I think we did very well was from the beginning say, we're going to be evidence-based every step of the way.
Okay.
And some funders don't care about that so much. They want the pretty picture and the story, and a lot of that's important too. But we publish and we continue to publish, and I think that is a lot of work, and it's kind of expensive, but it really pays off. Yeah.
2 last questions before we finish. What are you grateful for? What does your work brings you human-wise?
I don't know how many 100 schools I have been to for visits. And there isn't a school that I have visited over the last 15 years that I don't leave and weep to see how this has happened. And it's not because of my team. Because of me, it's because of our team. We have about 50, 60 people in India or so, and the other team in Kenya, another team in Rwanda. And to see the work that all of them do every day, I'm just so grateful.
What touches you so much?
My own personal work, at a very soul level and psychological level, is really about unleashing potential. And to see that you really don't need to do very much. For me, the symbolism is really about kind of like everybody has a candle on top of their head, and some are lit and some are not. For these millions of children,
it doesn't take much to lead them.
It doesn't take much to just light, and then it's up to them to do the work.
And it's the same for everyone.
It's the same for everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. And the last piece that I'm really grateful for is my wife and partner, Kate, who's here, who leads all our research and programs. And today is our 10th wedding anniversary. So
yay!
She flew in this morning.
Happy anniversary.
So we'll be celebrating it in Paris. But the opportunity to work with your spouse, and we met through the work, the opportunity to work with your partner every day in such a close, level, and to be so aligned is beautiful, beautiful opportunity, gift.
My very last question, it's hard after what you just said, but my very last question is, what's next for CorStone?
Not more children. We've had enough. But I'm saying that because we are in lots of conversation right now, Kate and myself, as well as the rest of our team, about where we go from here. And I think probably like any business, you have if we're going to call it a business or a venture, you have to think, do you want to go more broad or do you want to go more deep? Our work in India and Kenya in particular is going quite broad, but we hope that over years it will get deeper and deeper so that we don't lose the fidelity and the quality of the work as it expands. The second piece of that certainly is moving to new countries. Like I said, we have 12% of the world's population with living mostly without that candle lit, I guess.
There's a lot of work still.
And that's what we do. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Steve. Can we make a big round of applause for Steve Leventhal?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, so it's now time to welcome Antoinette, Klatzky, and Otto Scharmer. Ladies and gentlemen, please make a round of applause for them. Hi again. Hello. Hello. Thank you so much for being here. How are you feeling today?
Thanks for having us. Feeling good, feeling excited for our talk and to share together.
I had an idea while we were sitting right before. If you're okay, I would love to start. I need to introduce you first. Sorry, they're so famous that I don't need to introduce them, but maybe it's better. So Antoinette, you're the Vice President of Programs and Partnerships of the Eileen Fisher Foundation and board member and senior faculty at the Presencing Institute. And Otto Scharmer, you are the co-founder of the Presencing Institute, author of Theory U, and you are an action researcher who co-creates innovations in learning and leadership that you deliver through many classes in many different institutes, among which the Presencing Institute at the MIT. Is that right? Okay. So my idea was, since you're addressing inner change, I've noticed throughout the years that inner change and especially the interest in human beings and transformation never comes from nowhere. There's usually events in a life that brings you here. So rapidly, if I may say, we have time, but I know we have many more subjects. I know it's very personal, so again, I will let you tell us whatever you want. You don't have to go too deep if you don't want to, but what happened in your life that brought you to being so interested in inner transformation and raising the level of consciousness? Antoinette.
Oh, okay. Great. Well, hello, everyone. Jump into my life story, shall we? So I didn't know where to start. You just asked me this question, and I felt like, okay, birth, pre-birth, I don't know. But on the one hand, I grew up with a single mother in New York, and I have a multi-ethnic background. And so I think for me, growing up, I think I came in with, everybody says I was a happy baby, but I think I came in also with a lot of anger. And the other side of anger is also passion. So a lot of people who see me, there's like a fierceness and a joy in that. But when I was quite young, I was trying to figure it out. Like, who am I in this world? And who am I? Particularly, I went to a very white Jewish day school, and I was, in the summer especially, not very white. And so I was really trying to figure out, who am I as a young little person of color, and in a world that didn't look like me, and with a mom who didn't look like me. And so I think that was an early place of this kind of consciousness of who am I, and also seeing myself as a bridge builder between worlds. So recognizing that I wasn't only from this one place, that I was actually more than just this one place, and that I could probably connect with a lot more people than just the family that I was born into. And so I kind of had this experience of, there's something deeper than this. There's an interconnection, there's a oneness, and also, understanding that I wasn't just my mother's religion or my father's. There was something that was deeper from a spirit sense as well.
Otto, what happened in your life that brought you to get so interested in humankind?
Hello, everyone. So for me, I was born on and grew up on a regenerative farm, a biodynamic farm, and kind of the core organizing idea was so in a context I grew up, there was some spiritual awareness, right? Nature is not just a dead body, not just a resource, also not just a living system, but it has a beingness, and it's there are ways of connecting with that. So that was always a little bit part of the vocabulary. then I grew up in Germany of the 1970s and 80s. There was the first wave, really, of the environmental movement, and then the peace movement. I was a quite active part of that, and so through a number of experiences, realized that what is really animating any kind of movement is a felt sense of a future possibility that's very, very different to what we see now. And it's acute, so what you sense as a future possibility, to some degree, it's not an idea. It to some degree is more real than kind of the outer reality you meet there. So it was a very it was very ordinary, I would say, because I wasn't special. It was just like what the context I grew up in, and I would say that is an important gateway into what today I call presencing, because I think I already met that as something very, very ordinary that many people who are part of any kind of movement already experience. A felt sense of future possibility that I do not have to explain with long lectures to the person marching next to me on the streets. So there's this shared seeing and sensing, I think was another context for me. And then later I went to MIT, and there was also then the 90s, there was a lot of, I thought this is such a powerful, also generational movement, that will change everything pretty much now, right? That wasn't exactly what happened. And then I wondered, so where are all these people, right? So what happened to them, right? And then I arrived at MIT, and it was a real eye-opener, because I participated in what back then MIT's Peter Senge had organized as an organizational learning center. And I was very clear, it wasn't an accident, right? I picked that place because I picked up from the writing, not the word spirituality, but an openness between the lines to that deeper dimension of consciousness-based change.
It wasn't written, but you could feel it.
Yeah, not the vocabulary, but you could feel the openness. It was kind of, alluded to or described in other ways. That's why I wanted to be there. And to me, now, that deeper dimension, and then I arrived in the first workshop with the companies, and it was such an eye-opener to me that what they did is creating very different learning opportunities that not were mentally, but really that went into much deeper levels of connection and reflection and collective self-reflection. And it was interesting. You see that one moment and kind of a whole new world goes out. Oh, that's possible too, right? So it opens in your own mind a whole other field of possibility. And I also felt kind of some things that were missing then. And I'm just kind of looking at Arana sitting over there. I met her a few years later, right? And so I knew, so I always had this idea, we need to bring the awareness, but also the art and social arts dimension more into these deeper transformational learning environments. Because otherwise it's just sitting in the head. And meeting Arana was in that way a life-changing moment for me, because I instantly saw, I knew what needed to happen, but I couldn't do it alone.
What needed to happen? Self-awareness. What needed to happen?
Basically a totally different holding space that allows transformation to happen, not just individually, but on a collective level. And when I say on a collective level, the word that I'm today would use for that is on the level of the social field. That means on the level of how we relate to one another, the qualities of relationship, right? The amount of boundaries that separate us or that we are able to melt down. And those are environments that you can create and that have a profound impact on how you collaborate. So one of the skills, how you co-create and how you converse and communicate with each other. So I guess what I'm saying is the gateway for me was through social context and through noticing the deeper level of experience that comes up for me when you go out into the world and engage with the world. If you pay attention to the deeper level of experience that is evoked by that, that is an important gateway for transformation that not only happens on the level of one person, another person, but that happens on the level of the whole system, or to use this different word, a social field. What is a social field? It is a system with a soul, right? It is a system with an interior dimension. And that interior dimension can be cultivated, not just on the level of the individual, but on the level of the whole.
So that's what we're going to discuss right now. Thank you. It was such a good intro to our subject. It's shifting, right? Or am I the only one thinking that? I feel like it's shifting, and politicians and system thinkers and scientists and you at the Presencing Institute, lots of people understand now that, again, we won't change the world if we don't change our posture, our inner world, ourselves. You've been with Ahawana and other, obviously, in advance on the subjects. Now we start to realize, but you were talking about that 30 years ago, which sounds crazy to me, apart from Buddhists. I don't know who was addressing those subjects. What do you do to address, we've seen before with Erik, the inner development goals. How do you address this inner shift, this inner transformation through your work with the inner development goals? Antoinette.
So, you know, I've just been thinking about this experience that you asked and where we are now. And for me, just bridging some of my little life story to how we do that now, I think, you know, this experience of activating social fields is a big part of how we do that. So, you know, how do we actually activate what Otto was just sharing about? And I think many of us in this room have done that in a lot of different ways. And so for me, you know, yesterday actually, Rob Hopkins, who you held the session with yesterday from Transition Network, he was talking about this experience of the longing. So this idea of having a longing, and that if we can cultivate the longing that we feel, that that will shape history. And I think in a lot of ways, you know, so Otto and I not most recently, but in 2020 during the pandemic early moments, we were planning a global forum, which the Presencing Institute had been running for close to 10 years at that point. And we had this moment where we said, we're not going to be able to do this the way that we thought. We are not going to be able to do a 200-person in-person in Berlin. So what are we going to do? And the initial thought was, let's just postpone. Let's just, you know, the team was kind of like, let's just push it off, because it'll only last a few weeks. Hindsight is 2020, right? But actually, at that moment, Otto and I both felt, what if we did it now? What if we just did this online and now? And actually, what's needed now is to activate this social field and to activate this connection that we have with each other. And so Otto sent me this little, we were doing a description back and forth, and he sent the title. And it was Global Activation of Intention and Action, Gaia. And I was like, that's it. That's what we're doing. That's what's happening. That's what we're doing. And I think that moment was we had been kind of building these online courses. Otto had a massive open online course through MIT. It continues to exist called ULab. And that has been an incredible activator of over 200,000 people around the world. And in that moment of 2020, of the pandemic, of global activation of intention and action, we realized that we thought maybe 1,000 people will show up, that 13,000 people in a moment said, this is exactly what we need in our communities. And being here in Paris and with our colleagues here in France who immediately picked up on it. There are, communities that immediately said, how do we translate this? How do we make this right for our region and our place? And so there's just incredible language track leaders who came up out of the woodwork, an incredible team in the Presencing Institute, many of whom are here, who immediately got activated and said, how do we not just kind of move into action right away, but do the inner work to set an intention, to listen to each other, to activate our communities around a shared intention, and then move forward together. And that work has continued to move into different contexts, communities, organizations,
It might sound like a simple question, but why is it important to set a common intention as a group?
I mean, for me, my experience is that that setting where this is my experience, but this is also built on the work of Otto and the Presencing Institute, is that where we put our attention is where our energy is going to go. And so setting an intention, stating where we're moving towards, setting that as an individual, setting that for our community is actually surfacing. It's not just making something up. It's surfacing something that we're moving towards so we can all see it together. And when we start to see it together, we can bring our attention to it together, and then we can start moving towards it.
It's as simple as this. Otto.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. And so intention really, if attended to, can serve as an attractor, right, for energy, for possibilities, and for co-creativity. If it's done as a shared intention. And
Even more
so
than
you
alone.
could say that in many ways what is mindfulness and meditation and all this inner work, it's about realigning attention and intention. And how do you transform a social field? You realign attention and intention on the level of the whole, on the level of what we do together. So those are kind of practices that often don't exist through the existing traditions, and where we need to develop new methods and tools and spaces where we can develop that. And that's essentially what in the Presencing Institute, the past took that Arana and I and Antoinette and others co-founded, where we try to build methods, tools, and spaces that are scalable. In other words, that can be democratized, that can be made accessible to everyone and not just to small groups.
How do you do that? How do you scale? How do you democratize?
So, for example, in ULab, which is like a MOOC, an open online platform, that was based on MITx. We had, so it's free, it's open, it's available to everyone. We have that for all of our tools. More than 200,000 people participated in this journey. But that, of course, the old MIT structure is one to many, right? So that's kind of how knowledge is. So we know, right? And here it's everyone. And of course, that's not how a social field is shifting, right? And so we needed, with the Presencing Institute, to complement that side with community organizing tools that you, in your own context, in your own place, can form your own community, your own hub, your own initiative. And that has happened really across the planet in thousands of places. And that's kind of has activated an ecosystem of change. So just to continue the story that Antoinette was sharing, because it does move to the larger question I think we are talking about, how does this happen in institutions, if it ever does, right?
Yeah.
So, in the story that Antoinette was referencing, the Gaia story, which is interesting for the following reason. Usually when people think about transformation and so on, like it's a long process and you need to put in all these places and so on, that was not at all what we did. What we did is, because if you live in a moment of disruption, right, and the pandemic was kind of one version of that, and we know one thing about the future, more stuff is coming, right? So when you live in a moment of disruption, then what you need to do is to create a holding space to make sense together of what is arising from our experience. That's really what we did.
So it's like circles of people speaking?
Small circles through intentional stillness, through mindfulness practices, through social art practices, through individual reflection practices. Then, so there was usually an input, then there is a moment of stillness that you have together as a planetary community. You move into small groups from there. You often practice with social arts, kind of you use embodied ways of knowing, and then you come back together to share, like in a global dialogue, kind of what's emerging kind of from all these conversations. And all of that is captured with another social art form that we co-pioneered, which is together with Kelvin Bird, which is generative scribing. So you capture, and we had a version of that through Jace yesterday, who was also here, who created like an animated version thereof that allows you then to go through a process of mirroring, right? And a lot of accessing the deeper sources of knowing has to do with resonance. Has to do with paying attention to the deeper levels of resonance, the deeper level of experiences that we have. And the gateway to accessing that is stillness. So that's kind of why it doesn't happen automatically. You need to put in a minimal enabling structure. But when you do that, a lot is happening out of that. So one example was, one person contacted me and said, hey, I'm in the UN and that's exactly what we need now, right? So we were about, these kinds of sessions, right, across the UN.
Yeah.
Can you do that? So we talked, and we created a little prototype, and then together with the people who showed up, we designed how that is workable for the UN. It was really interesting that it was thousands of people participated. It was kind of across the whole journey. And many people told us in the UN that they were shocked that they could have these interior dimensions, these inner conversations, right, in a UN context. Because obviously, so what happens, of course, is that there is like this organizational discourse, very rational, very kind of strategy, intervention, this and that. And then whatever is the interior dimension is totally separate of that. Many people have that. Right? Many people have like this deeper, but it's not part.
They don't listen to it. They dismiss it.
It's not part of what happens in meetings.
Yeah.
And so they were really shocked to see these elements coming together. And it went on into many countries and many different interventions. But that's, all of that is arising from very minimal interventions that create holding spaces to attend to what's emerging from the current moment.
But how, because obviously they will create that inner space through whatever experience you're offering while you're there. How do you make sure they continue when you're gone? In the United Nations or wherever else?
Yeah, and I mean, there's a number of different ways that they continue, but in part, there's an online platform that people can be using. And often the coaching circles or the connections that people make, because they're small groups and because they're small connections, then they continue that on together. And in the UN work that the Presencing Institute was able to continue, there were SDG leadership labs where we had our facilitators in partnership with country leaders in the UN, so they could continue working with their teams, building out retreats. I think you just were in Colombia, continuing to work with them. So there are several interventions that people started to take their own teams and then start to do that in their own experiences, because they built more capacity inside themselves to be able to then hold others to be able to do that kind of work.
Do you want to?
So the SDG Leadership Labs, were created in 26 countries, so that's 20% of the UN country teams or the humanitarian teams that have to respond to crisis situations. And I think it's an example of two types of interventions, how you can use work with inner development goals or with the consciousness side of change. One is you bring them together like in an open dialogue format or kind of under the header of like inner development goals or something like that. The other one is you come together, so you flip it, right? You come together in the context of the change that you want to create together. So in this case, the UN country teams, it was either the SDG agenda, kind of that was relevant for that specific country team, or it was the humanitarian country team with a crisis situation that needed an immediate response. In that case, you create like the convening space and the shared space of awareness around that challenge, around that aspiration, and all the inner development dimension, right, the relational and the consciousness dimension comes in on the how side, how we are going on a journey that will allow us to address that more effectively and in a different way. So that's a very different way of. So there is, when you convene around consciousness, please come here, right? That's a smaller group than the one that comes together around shared challenges. And a lot what we need to learn together as a community of change makers is how we create awareness, so collective action from shared awareness. In other words, how we bring together multiple stakeholders that agree on many things and that come with very different interests around a shared situation and help them to move them from a silo view to a systems view. So to help them to move from seeing it just from my angle to a shared, deepened awareness of the whole situation, of what's emerging, what's wanting to happen, which then allows that group to collaborate and co-create in a much more fluid and flexible way, which is actually the more necessary, the more the old system is collapsing. And that's exactly what's happening now.
Maybe just to build on that a little bit, so my context is that I work inside Eileen Fisher, which is an ethical apparel designer and has 60 stores across the United States. Anyway, 30 plus years in operation. And when you say this bit about the siloed view, and when we think about how do you have sustainability across a company, or how do you actually move towards designing a regenerative business, which I talked about earlier today, how do you actually break down those barriers? And when you talk about collective action from shared awareness, it's these kinds of small connections that happen across the company, where you have somebody who works in supply chain speaking with somebody who works in packaging, speaking with somebody who works in marketing, and these connections, we now have a people and planet committee inside the the company, I could be in the foundation completely siloed in my own work. I would be just doing grant making and, you know, doing the things that foundations do in their, you know, well, we'll just do this charity work over here. And it's through my work with the Presencing Institute over the last over 10 years is that I broke down those barriers inside myself. I, as a foundation executive, should do X, Y, Z. And I realized that my job is actually not about working just for this organization and doing the job that somebody thinks that I should do, but it's really about connecting to who I am on planet Earth, going back to your earlier question, and what is the deepest contribution that I can make to the world through where I am right now. And that's what I've seen in the UN leaders as well, is this question of who am I, who is my highest self, and what is the work that I'm here to do on planet Earth? And those are the questions that I was asked when I first came into this work. And I think that's really shaped and guided my ability to be creative and our ability to be creative and co-creative together and move us towards that kind of, oh, we can take collective action when we can see and sense and feel what's needed, what our shared longing is, and what's possible. And we can start working towards that together.
That's an amazing final word. And Otto, unless you have a final word to share with the audience, because we're over time now.
Well, I would say we all know what's ahead of us is not necessarily easy. We all know, and it's not going to be easy. We all know that we live in a moment of real, we are at a bifurcation point where things can move one way or another. And that what will make the difference in a bifurcation point are very small things. It could be very few people like us and our capacity to show up together or not in moments like that. I think that's kind of there was never a moment on this planet before where those alive on the planet and the actions they take or not has such a profound impact on all the generations to come. So we happen to be around now, and I think what my closing, what my closing word is that I feel, so sometimes maybe you can feel a little bit like the sense of collective depression that is so much around us. And something that helps me to, but that's what I feel here when I think about all the trends, but it's not what I experience here. And I think what helps to stabilize that is just the imagination, how many, not only of past generations, but also future generations are looking at us now. And the awareness for profound change is already there. Sandrine quoted that, right? 3 out of 4 people in the G20 countries support well-being economies, support transformational change. And yet most people don't know exactly how to do that. And I think so the awareness is there. It's beginning to pop up. It's beginning to manifest as a global movement, but it's a global movement that's not aware of itself, right? That manifests with 1,000 names, 1,000 faces, and that isn't amplified to the degree it could. What is amplified today is the noise, AKA social media, but what is not amplified is kind of this awakening that's happening across the planet. And I think where I see our, and I think our probably includes everyone here, role is
to create these supporting infrastructures, right? These holding spaces where this awareness that's already there can manifest in new kind of relationships and in new kind of collective actions. And the way that I think is showing up today is through a top-down and a bottom-up strategy. And on the bottom-up strategy, Antoinette shared the Gaia online story. We did a lot of online, and what we believe today is that the future of online is offline. It's place-based gatherings that activate this deeper dimension of connection at scale in all world regions. And that's what we are working on now.
Thank you very much, Otto and Antoinette. A big round of applause for them
Thank
too.
you all.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day at ChangeNOW. Thank you so much. Ouais, bien sûr.